Welcome to Mac Stories Unwind, the show that's all about the picks. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hi, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, Federico, except I've got something to say about technology at the outset of this episode.
Something about technology.
Yeah, I know
Okay.
this is a little outside the normal scope of this particular show, but I think people can. I think it should be allowed because it does kind of. I don't know. I think it fits a little bit in any event. So Logitech recently put out all of these different peripherals for the Mac that are designed to look nice with the Mac. They put out a new MX Master 3S mouse designed specifically for the Mac, a new mechanical keyboard, a new vertical mouse, and a bunch of other stuff. They sent me a couple of them. They sent me the mouse and they sent me the mechanical keyboard. And I've been testing them out. And the MX Master 3S mouse, if you recall, perhaps, Logitech put out a similar mouse, a black version of it, about a year ago, maybe 6 months ago. And the big thing about this compared to the regular 3 was that it has a higher PPI. It has 8,000 PPI, that's pixels per inch, which is just very high resolution. So if you have a very large screen, it's easier to set a high PPI and get from one side of the screen to the other with smaller mouse movements is really what it comes down to.
Wait, is that a thing?
Yeah, it is. It's
Really?
Yeah, it is. Maybe they measure it in DPI. Now you're making me second my guess myself, but it is. It's a higher resolution mouse, and that started out in the world of gaming, really, because you can have higher precision movements in a game with a higher resolution mouse, but it also just works well with a really big screen. Now, the reality is my screen, which is 27 inches, it doesn't need that kind of resolution. I cranked it all the way up, and it was like I moved my mouse a centimeter and I was all the way across the screen. It was a little too sensitive, so I backed it off to around 2,500 or so. But that's not my gripe. First of all, I do want to say I like this mouse a lot. They actually made the clicks quieter, which is really nice if you're in the middle of recording a podcast and you don't want to hear clicky in the background. It even travels over the desk a little quieter, and I haven't figured out how they did that because it doesn't seem that much different on the bottom.
Question for you: do you have a mouse pad?
I do not. I'm just doing it straight on the wooden desk, so it can be a little scratchy at times because I have the older Logitech MX Master 3, not 3S, but 3 mouse from a couple of years ago. And I'm a fan of these mice for the most part. But here's the thing. Here's where the gripe comes in, Federico. I'm using this mouse, and I'm kind of testing it side by side with the old MX3 mouse. And I realized that it's a little stuttery on the new white one. I'm thinking, what is that? It's like dropping frames, basically. And I thought, interesting. So I went and was looking at the documentation, looking at the website. It's connected by Bluetooth, whereas the old one is connected by one of those dongles that Logitech has. And so I've got two things I want to raise. The first is that this new fancy Mac version of this mouse does work with a dongle, but it works with a bolt dongle. Logitech upgraded their dongles because they were prone to hacking. I guess there was a mouse jacking exploit that if you're close enough, you could take control of somebody's mouse and then control their computer from afar, which is not good, obviously. So they came up with a higher security one. It's not backwards compatible, and they don't include it in the box. Now, I ordered one, and I thought, this is really weird that this isn't in the box, because the old mouse I had, it was in the box. I went and looked. The MX Master 3S, the regular black model, has it in the box. They didn't include it in the Mac version, but they charge the same price for both mice. In other words, they're charging the Mac people an extra $15 if they want the dongle to get the better tracking of their mouse, which I think is kind of, I don't like it. I don't like that at all. I mean, it's a hidden price, basically. I bought one because I wanted to try it and see what it was like, because it's exactly the same mouse. It's just not being included in that one, and they're charging the same price. So that's gripe number one. Gripe number two is these dongles still use USB-A, which is ridiculous in 2022.
Oh, come on.
Right? So fortunately, my Mac Studio has a USB-A, port in it, and I don't really use it for anything anymore. So I put it in there. So that's gripe number two. But I just think it's kind of, I don't know. It just felt cheap to me to not put the dongle in the box when it's just clearly a superior experience with the dongle, and they're doing it on the other versions of the mice. So that's my gripe. That's all I have to say.
Okay, well, I was not expecting that, but otherwise you're liking the mouse.
I do,
yeah,
I do, and it's like this kind of light gray color. It fits in very nicely with Apple's standard keyboard and trackpad, so it fits in nicely if you're wanting to kind of keep a standard aesthetic with all of your peripherals. So that's kind of nice, but it's not much different than the 3S though. Otherwise.
Mm-hmm. And speaking while we're on the subject of things on your desk, I know that you covered this on Mac Stories Weekly today, so those who want to see the photos and read more details should go check that out. But you have a new desk USB charger as well.
I do. It's a really chunky, I shouldn't say chunky, it's a hefty charger. It's kind of heavy. It's definitely not portable.
Because the previous one you got sort of was catching fire and melting on people's desks and was recalled.
Yes, not mine, fortunately. It was one called the Hyperjuice 100-watt stackable something or other. And this one is made by Ugreen. It has 4 USB-C ports and 2 USB-A, and it can deliver up to an aggregate of 200 watts split between all of those. So I kind of cover how that works and how to use it to kind of maximize the charging power. But I just have it sitting on the corner of the desk, and I then stack my stuff up and plug it all in with short USB-C cords.
Very nice, very nice. So you, as I mentioned, you have more details and a bunch of photos, including your Steam Deck, in Mac Stories Weekly today. So good.
Which looks enormous on that pile, and it kind of was.
I know. Well, the Steam Deck is kind of an enormous handheld console.
Right.
So yeah. All right. Well, okay. So what do you have for me, John, on this episode of Unwind?
All right. I do have a pick, and my pick is Experts in a Dying Field, which is a new album from the Beths, which just came out maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I am absolutely, completely in love with this album. It's a kind of power pop, indie pop with a little bit of punk in it. It just really dives in and goes at you. The first 3 tracks, which are 3 of my favorite tracks. I mean, they're just absolutely fantastic. There's Expert in the Dying Field, which is the title track. Knees Deep, which also has a really funny music video that I sent you. And Silence is Golden. Those are the opening 3. There are some slower songs in here, but for the most part, these are really hard driving songs with crunchy guitars, but a really upbeat feel to them, which is interesting because if you track the lyrics, it's really kind of a melancholy, bunch of lyrics about things like loss and relationships breaking up and all sorts of things like that, which are the kind of things you wouldn't really expect would go really well with an upbeat tempo and everything, but it really does work really well. And I don't know. I mean, I've really enjoyed this album. It's been reviewed very well in a bunch of places. Pitchfork gave it an 8 out of 10, which if you know Pitchfork at all, an 8 out of 10 might as well be a 10 out of 10.
Yeah, it's pretty high rated album.
Yeah, it really is. And it's there's this really good quote I saw from slantmagazine.com that I want to read because it really kind of captures it pretty well, I thought, which is the group's 3rd album, Expert in a Dying Field, is an exhilarating power pop tour de force replete with bristling guitar riffs and bright infectious harmonies. It's also a devastating exploration of anxiety, insecurity, and regret, a reflection of how in life there can be no true joy without sadness. And I thought that kind of really encapsulated it really well in just a couple of sentences. So I highly recommend it.
Nice. I was not familiar with this band.
Yeah, this is their 3rd album. They've been around for a little while. I think their first album was maybe in 2018, I want to say, and then they had a COVID album during the pandemic. But this is, and I've listened to some of their music in the past, but this, like, top to bottom, is my favorite one of all. It's they've really come into their own, and it's a good. It's a little bit longer album. It's 45 minutes for 12 tracks, which is maybe on the long side. But still very, very good album.
Very nice. I should check it out. Okay. So the pick that I have this week is a returning pick, I guess, in that I am picking Better Call Saul again because we finished the entire series last night, 2 nights ago. Anyway, this week.
You did it in just over a month, which I'm pretty impressed with.
Yeah, so I picked Better Call Saul 4 weeks ago here on Unwind, I believe. And yeah, we ran through the show pretty quickly because we really liked it. And I wanted to talk about it because I have some overarching thoughts on the show, as well as a few gripes about the end, the finale. So I don't know. Have you been planning to watch the show?
I may at some point, but go ahead and spoil it. It'll be okay. I won't mind.
Otherwise, you can just drop your headphones and I'll talk into the microphone for a few minutes, and you can come back and you won't listen to it if you ever plan to watch it. I don't know. Whatever you prefer, I'm fine with it.
I'll stick with you. I'll stick with you for the duration, Federico.
All right. So first, the good stuff. So obviously, after season 1, what the show does is they start playing around with this idea of, in the very first episode of each season, and just the first 10 or so minutes of the first episode of the first season, except for season 5, I want to say, they show you a flash forward. And you can tell it's a flash forward because Jimmy is older, and the entire scene is shot in black and white. And in each of these first episodes, you start piecing together what actually happened. So you're in the future, Jimmy is older, is no longer living in Albuquerque, is no longer a practicing lawyer, and he goes by the name of Gene Takovic. So, of course, the guy has changed his identity. And then you start piecing together, okay, so he's living in Omaha, Nebraska, because he changed his identity. He escaped from Albuquerque, which we know is a thing that can be done because in the Breaking Bad universe, in the previous show, Breaking Bad, we know that Saul Goodman, which would be the attorney name of James McGill, knows a person that can help you change your identity and change your life and disappear. Which, by the way, this person runs a vacuum cleaner shop. So
okay.
That's a nice, they literally sack you out of your current existence and you're gone, which is a nice metaphor for that. So anyway, we know, okay, so Jimmy escaped from Albuquerque, ran away, disappeared, and he now goes by Gene and works at a Cinnabon at a mall in Omaha, Nebraska. And everybody's like, he leads this pretty normal life, pretty boring routine, actually. But as these episodes go by, so season 3, season 4, it is clear that Gene, or Jimmy, is living by continuously peeking over his shoulder, basically. He's obsessed with the idea of, the drug cartel, the Mexican cartel, still being able to find him, even in Nebraska. And so he lives in fear. And he doesn't go out. He doesn't have any friends. He goes to the Cinnabon at the mall, and he goes back home and he listens. You see, he doesn't watch television. He doesn't listen to music. He has a police scanner.
Oh, wow.
And he listens to this police scanner almost compulsively to, I don't know, see if the police is investigating him or if maybe there's a crime related to the cartel having found its way to Omaha, Nebraska. Anyway, it doesn't lead a good life. And you also start to understand, well, what happened to Kim? Kim Wexler, one of the main characters of, obviously, starting with season 1. And as the seasons go, it's clear that this show is very much, so we're now in the past, the show is very much about James McGill, or Jimmy, progressively descending into the character of Saul Goodman, this shady criminal lawyer that essentially constantly finds pretty questionable ways to make money and represent extremely sketchy characters, up to the point of becoming, quote-unquote, a friend of the cartel by representing one of the key family members of the Salamanca family, Lalo Salamanca, who commits a homicide in Albuquerque, and Jimmy is forced to represent him under a false identity, of course. He lies about it, doesn't tell the district attorney about the fact that this guy is in fact a Salamanca who killed another person, and is even forced to go over the border into the Mexican desert to pick up 2 bags with $7 million cash to pay for this guy's bail. So as Jimmy, basically over the course of 6 seasons, you see this progressive reverse evolution of from James McGill into Saul Goodman. And the thing is, initially you think, well, of course, Kim was also an attorney. She's not gonna play it like Jimmy. She's gonna stick to the law. She's a reputable, very respected lawyer. She's not gonna end up like Jimmy, constantly playing these schemes and these cons, to make money and to, hide all these secrets. But the thing is, even though it may not look like it, Kim, because she's in love with Jimmy and they eventually get married, and by the way, they get married because even that's a scheme. They get married because if you're called to testify, you cannot testify against your husband. So but they are in love regardless, even though they get married with this very sad bureaucratic ceremony at the local government office. But even Kim initially may not look like it, but she's really, especially by the final season, she's really the brains of the Saul Goodman operation, of the Saul Goodman and Associates enterprise. And they play this big final scheme that has horrible consequences. So now, of course, jumping forward in the in between season 1 and 6, there are multiple storylines about Jimmy finding a job at another law firm, giving up that job because, after all, he's always gonna be what he used to be called in his youth, Sleeping Jimmy. He's always gonna be the guy who tries to be a con man, essentially. There's the storyline of Jimmy and his brother Chuck that gets developed over the course of multiple seasons. That also doesn't end well at all. There's multiple storylines involving Kim having this big bank as a client and screwing that up. But anyway, eventually they play this big scheme against one of their former boss at the HHM law firm, Howard Hamlin. Basically, it's this long con in which, through various schemes involving even Jimmy dressing up as Howard and stealing his car just to be seen by other lawyers do some pretty nasty things, basically they drive Howard insane. They convince all of their friends that Howard is doing drugs, that is, picking up prostitutes, that is distracted at work, that is bringing drugs to work. And eventually, and Howard isn't doing anything, right? Isn't doing any of that. He's actually a pretty good guy, and you feel pretty sad for the guy. I mean, he's done some questionable things to Jimmy in the past, but none to the extent of what these two guys, Kim and Jimmy, are planning. And they drive the guy so insane that it gets, his wife doesn't believe him, his associates don't believe him, is another lawyer that's participating with him on a joint case together doesn't believe him anymore. And essentially what happens is that one night he shows up at Jimmy and Kim's apartment, but Lalo Salamanca is there because he's threatening them. And Lalo Salamanca is there, sees this guy walk in, and he doesn't think about it even twice, and he shoots him in the head. So Howard Hamlin dies because he was at the wrong place at the wrong time, which is very sad, actually. And all that. So right there, you see one of the major themes about Better Call Saul, which I appreciated. The idea of your actions, even though they may seem small and trivial and inconsequential, they do have consequences. And I think the authors, they did a really good job driving home that point of, yeah, you may think it's funny that Jimmy, is this funny con man who has all these tricks up his sleeve and can play all these different schemes and cons on people. But actually, all those schemes, they have consequences. And if you're not careful, you end up having really tragic consequences. So that's the good stuff. I think they've done, for all the seasons, they've done a really incredible job of making you care for Jimmy, hoping that Jimmy can change and improve. But as a viewer, you're also left powerless in witnessing this reverse evolution of Jimmy and progressively becoming Saul Goodman, which is going to happen because, if you watched Breaking Bad, you know that Saul Goodman exists. And also one of the things that I noticed in watching Better Call Saul, all the seasons, the more I kept watching it, the more I kept thinking, all these other characters that are here in Better Call Saul, but I know they are not in Breaking Bad, are they all dead?
Yeah.
And like the more you go, the more you start thinking about this aspect. And yeah, most of them are for one reason or another, but not all of them. Now, what I didn't like about the final season, of course, is, had to be split. They had to shoot it in 2 parts. I believe the reason why is that the lead actor who plays Jimmy McGill, Bob Odenkirk, suffered a heart attack last year. I want to say, I don't know, our friend Stephen Hackett, who's also a huge Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad fan, was telling me that the final season maybe suffered because they had to shoot it in 2 parts, which of course never helps when you have to do that.
Right.
And that's something that I noticed. I thought the final season was very unevenly paced, especially toward the final episodes. In the final episodes, that's when the creators of the show, they really start going into these multiple timelines, overlapping timelines with flashbacks, like multiple layers of flashbacks and flash forwards, and like simultaneous timelines. Like you really need to pay attention to understand, like, okay, when are we right now? Because they start showing you like in the before times when Chuck is still alive, and then in the present, and then in the future, because you see Walt and Jesse from Breaking Bad. So Bryan Cranston is here.
Oh wow!
And Aaron Paul is here. And actually, Bryan Cranston delivers one of the best lines of season 6 when Jimmy, now Saul Goodman, of course, is telling Walt about like the fact that even when he was younger, he used to pull schemes and cons, and he just looks at him with that look and that voice that Cranston can so excellently deliver, and he's like, "Oh, so you've always been this way," and that really sums it up. And so. I thought that the final season was very unevenly paced because, for example, they waste way too much time showing you that Kim left town. She skipped town. She's no longer in Albuquerque after the whole Howard thing went down, and she went to Florida, and she's now engaged. She has a partner anyway, and she works at a sprinkler company, like the most possible boring job, and she leads this incredibly boring existence, which could have been explained in 5 minutes, and instead there's an entire like half an episode on this, and after 20 minutes, like Sylvia and I were like, look, we get it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, she works at the sprinkler company. Like there were a ton of moments of silence. I don't know, I just thought that in the very final episodes there were a bunch of slow moments that maybe could have been like, it could have used a tighter editing.
Right. They dwelled on things a little bit too much, it sounds like.
A little too much. And but my big complaint, like, I won't spoil the very ending, what James decides to do. I personally liked it as like the thing in and of itself. Sylvia didn't, which I understand. But as a, like, you may or may not like the decision of how to structure essentially the very final event. What I didn't like, though, is they didn't explain exactly what happened in between the events of Breaking Bad and the 6 years that followed.
No.
And I would have personally liked to see even 30 minutes, instead of wasting 30 minutes on the Sprinkler Company. It would have been nice to have, even if just like a fast-paced reel to show you, okay, so like what happened after the Howard thing went down, but before Jimmy decides to skip town and become Gene Takovic in Nebraska. Did he ever had any contact with Kim? How bad did he get as Saul Goodman? And like, I understand that we had some of those details from Breaking Bad, but I thought we could have used a refresher in Better Call Saul as well, even from the perspective of the people around Jimmy. So maybe from the perspective of Francesca, his assistant, or from the perspective of Kim in Florida, but in the years before. And instead, you're just thrown 6 years in the future, and the final thing goes down. But I figured it would have been nicer to have more context from those years before.
Right.
And instead, everything is very slow up until the very end. And I thought the pacing of that was a little off. But overall, like, would I, a Breaking Bad fan, recommend watching Better Call Saul? Absolutely. Is it my all-time favorite show? No. Do I still prefer Breaking Bad? Yes. But this is a very, like, the whole package is so worth it. Right? I think I still prefer Breaking Bad, even though, like, I absolutely loved Odenkirk's performance as Jimmy McGill and Saul Goodman. We are going to rewatch Breaking Bad, I think. And after that, we're going to wrap it up with the El Camino movie, which is the sequel that we never watched. But I just had this a few thoughts to share. How long have I been going with this?
You've been going a while.
Oh, I've been going. Okay. So, yeah, I just had a few thoughts about like the pacing of the finale. But overall, I really liked how the themes of consequences and change were developed. And there were so many little references that you can appreciate. Like, Sylvia didn't like this, but for example, the character of Mike Ehrmantraut, it is never fully explained why and how Mike became Jimmy's or Saul's right-hand man. It is inferred in that you see in a scene that in the future that Saul Goodman has this little black book that used to be the black book of a previous fixer in the town of Albuquerque with all the contacts of all these questionable people. So now you understand, oh, I see now Saul as the little black book, therefore Mike now works for him. But like, I don't know. I would have liked a proper explanation instead of wasting a bunch of time on those very slow moments. Yeah.
All right. That sounds great. I mean, I do feel like this is a show, both this and Breaking Bad are ones that I should dig into at some point.
Oh, no, you got to watch it.
And at this point, I really ought to just start with Breaking Bad, probably. Wouldn't you suggest that at this point?
No, start with Better Call Saul. Yeah, go in order.
Okay.
No, let me think about it. See, no, I think you can start with Better Call Saul. I think, like, I'm trying to think, how much do you need to know? No, you can start with Better Call Saul because then you will appreciate Breaking Bad even more. The only thing that's going to look weird is that in the future, some characters will look younger.
Right.
The actors aged.
Sure.
And when Breaking Bad was, I almost wonder if they should remaster Breaking Bad with one of those aging or de-aging
little CGI
technologies.
Yeah, a little CGI to change their ages. Yeah, it is. Given the way they did it, it is. I'm sure that is noticeable. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, but anyway, start with Better Call Saul. You're gonna.
All right. Well, I'll do that. All right. I guess that's it for this week, Federico. We will be back in another week with another episode of Mac Stories Unwind. In the meantime, you can visit all of the work that we do over at macstories.net. Federico is on Twitter and Instagram, where he's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.